I'm joined this morning, very excitingly, by Cameron Carr, who's a partner in Mullen Coughlin. And your title, Cameron, I have to say, is so exciting. It reminded me of James Bond, International Cyber and Data Security Lawyer. So, Cameron, start by telling me a bit about, tell me about your job. What do you do?
So I run a team in London for Mullen Coughlin that's a specialist cybersecurity and data privacy firm. So when bad guys get into a system, we assist in the sense of providing privacy advice, helping a client through the incident. Our firm manages around 3 to 4,000 incidents a year. So all of the hacking kind of stories you see in the news, similar types of issues, guiding clients through true crisis pieces, and then working through that incident with them. So I lead the London team, where we've got about 10 lawyers, and then we have about 125 in the US as well. So the UK practice has been going for about 2 years, and loving it so far.
Let's come clean and say how we know each other. So,
Yeah.
Cameron, when you were a teenager, you loved singing and
Mhm.
performing then in musical theatre, but I know subsequently you've gone on and done a lot of other stuff. And
Yeah.
I was your singing teacher. And
Yes.
that's how we first met. And then you made an interesting comment about how some of the things that we did in our singing lessons way back then, you
Yeah.
still find yourself thinking about and using in your work. Tell me about that.
I think it's a mix, Julia. It's we there's a lot of different things, as I said, like going through the time that we spent together with singing training, and then also going through into when I was at university and still singing through there, and on agencies. Once I got out and I was training to be a lawyer, I needed to pay my rent in some ways whilst I was studying. So, gigging on some of these agencies were fantastic opportunities. But
What
yeah,
sort of thing did tell us a bit about the kind of gigging and what sort of singing did you do while you
well,
were
I
training?
I did a mix. I sang in an all male a cappella group that toured all over the world when I was at university. I think I went to the States 6 times on tour in like 3 years.
Wow, who is that with, Cameron?
It's a group called All the King's Men that I think doesn't exist in the same way anymore, but a real mix of people, and we've all gone on to. I think the majority of us actually don't sing now in the capacity of a professional setting, but we've got lawyers, a friend who works at a large music venue as their kind of programs manager, a dentist, a Max Fax doctor, a real mix of people that we've all kind of gone on to do our own things afterwards. But we had yeah, and then after university I joined a group called Esquire that was a Welsh male voice choir in London, and that was really a kind of agency. And it was always the chap who ran it ringing you up on a Sunday evening saying, "What are you doing Wednesday? Because I need you to go and sing the national anthem on Good Morning Britain." Or I sang with a group of us. I remember vividly doing last minute preparation for my trusts and wills exams at university, and the night before my exam, I sang with about 80 of us in the closing ceremony of the London Olympics, and
Oh
sitting
my
there
word.
with my study notes. And there's all these, famous people from like Brian May to Boris Johnson. I remember having a chat with Jessie J about my trust exam the next day, because that was kind of part of my life at that stage on the singing, and just randomly finishing work as a trainee and then hopping over to a hotel to sing Christmas carols for a few hours to get a few extra quid at the same time. It was a really really fun time, and lots of different
Mm,
venues that I ended up at, and obviously
mm.
good talking points when I rocked up at 9:30, and the partner says, "You look tired," and I said, "Yeah, a taxi picked me up at 3 a.m. to go to the Good Morning Britain studio and sing there." And he said, "Oh, great, that's a fantastic topic we can talk about with the client at lunchtime when we go out." So a real mix of things, but it certainly is,
Yeah,
when we, with all the training and things like that, there's certainly like a mix of both the physicality, pace of
yeah.
pace of delivery, and also just actually not really caring if you're turning up and standing up in front of 40 people,
Mm,
2,000, 3,000 people. You just get up and do it, and I think that certainly comes from singing, that the nerves aren't there in
yeah.
the same way.
Yeah. It's that sense that the show must go on and, no matter what happens, I've got to
Mm.
make this work
Yeah,
and I've got
yeah,
to
yeah.
make it work for the audience.
Yes.
And that's key, isn't it? I think that it's so much when people are talking, saying that they feel nervous about
Mm.
standing up in public. I think it's because when we feel nervous, we're focusing on us, on what am I
Yeah.
doing? What might I get wrong? And actually, I guess what your performance
Mm.
experience teaches you is that it's not about you. That the audience still had they've paid to come and see a performance, and
Yeah.
that's what they must get. And I think in terms of your business world, uh, do you find that you're having to perform on your feet and deliver for the audience, get the message over for the audience? How does it
Yeah. So I certainly think the biggest change, and I think when I started doing like seminars and presenting for work, the biggest change is the fact the lights are on rather than the lights are off. So, when people teach you singing, it's look at the spotlight, look at this, look up, like engage with the majority of your audience. But it's quite rare that you have that direct connection. You're kind of actually performing to a dark space. Whereas when you're presenting in like a conference room, you can see every single person in front of you. You can see who's falling asleep at the back, who's on their phone, who's kind of listening,
Mm,
who's you
mm,
make a point and who's raising their eyebrow as if to say that I'm not really sure about that. And you can also see the people who are engaged, and that's certainly I think one of the challenges I found was one of those shifts is that actually when you do see reactions, is still getting on with it and working out who you're engaging with. The problem is
yes.
you have people who really engage with you and you just talk to them and you're trying to still kind of bring it out to everyone. And you've got seminar rooms where people are to the left of you and to the right of you, and you're basically sitting on someone's lap in a conference room because you're so close together.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that did change quite a lot when I moved from singing to the other pieces, is that you could see that engagement. And equally, you're providing your own thoughts, your own kind of advice and expertise. Singing, you still have the reliance on you're performing someone else's music. There is always that risk that someone will look at it and go, "Yeah, I actually saw a better version of music for a while by someone 2 weeks ago that
Yeah.
was not as good as yours, isn't as great." But when it's your own content, you have that additional vulnerability where you're like, I do know this. I really love this subject matter. I really have a deep understanding of it because of my expertise, and I want to share it with everyone, but also not overshare it at the same time.
Yeah, so that's gosh, there's a lot in there. I mean, I love your point about the lights on, and a lot of the people I work with, a lot of my coaching clients will talk
Mm,
about how difficult it is to, as it were, not be pulled away into wondering what is that person thinking?
yeah.
Why did that expression cross their face? And when I'm coaching people and when I go into companies and do training, I talk about um, how to engage with, and also it depends on the size of the audience, doesn't it? Because,
Mm,
I always think if you're dealing with an audience of sort of up to 12 people where you could reasonably be expected to know
yeah.
all their names, that you can really engage with eye contact. But sometimes when you're delivering to a big auditorium, and what you're saying about you've got audience to the left and right,
Mm,
there's a real skill that in,
yeah.
in knowing how to deal with the eye contact in that situation. And there's a wonderful trick that I teach when I go into companies about that, which is actually totally taken from theatre, sort of, and I'm not, I won't go into it in detail now because it would take us too long, but
Yeah.
it's so interesting about how to manage and how not to look at the audience and be concerned about what does that say about us, and
Mm,
to realize our job is to get the message over to them. So you've been a lawyer a long time now, Cameron.
yeah.
Are there things you've learned along the way that you think are really, really useful skills to pass on to upcoming new lawyers coming in?
Mm.
What have you learned that would you feel you wished you'd known at the beginning?
So I would say a lot of the time for me, and actually a difference in probably musical theatre repertoire that I was doing to begin with, and then going into classical and like the a cappella stuff, we'd have to do everything off music. We wouldn't have sheet music in front of us. Like it's a very odd concept for me to have that reliance on notes and understanding and things like that. And so a lot of the time I'm presenting, I try and avoid, my notes in front of me and holding them in my face. And I remember one of the first presentations I did as a trainee. My wife's a teacher, or now works for the English Football League as their education manager. But she sat in the car and she said, "You cannot." She said, "Oh, have you got your presentation?" I was really nervous, and I said, "Yeah." And she said, "How does it start?" And it says, "Hello, I am Cameron. I am a trainee solicitor at X law firm. I'm here to talk to you today about this." And she said, "Get rid of those bloody notes right now. Like, it won't help you. You know this. You know this piece. Like, often it's helpful to have those cue cards and working. The big challenge I always had was like, I would always use slides as a prompt and kind of bullet points rather than using it as a full like script or having a script in front of me. And that, I think, is come from some of the work that I've done over the years. And I think the other thing that I do find, and I think there are videos where you talk about your string above your head and you're elevating your presence in a room, and that's been it's a big thing, I think, now, where we're in a world where traditionally, if I was going to a meeting, I would then move to my next meeting and I would have a couple of minutes walking down the corridor to sort myself out. Maybe I'd be able to get a glass of water. Maybe you go to the loo and then you give yourself a bit of a reset in the mirror before you then went out to do it. But now, in the world where you're going from one meeting straight into the next one, like you're literally hanging up on this one, straight into the next one, it's really hard to kind of refresh yourself and reset. And I think that's, when you're doing gigs and singing and stuff like that, you can. All the King's Men used to have a lot of choreography with it, and you would get to the end of a song and you're like, "Oh, I am exhausted. I am so tired, but now I need to reset myself and now go into quite a slow, moody, very serene song instead." And so having that ability to kind of pivot quickly and just kind of say, right,
Yeah.
okay, who's the next audience? What's the purpose of this? And off you go, is
Yeah.
actually something that I think is missed in singing, where you're going from a real powerful, loud, happy clappy song to then some really like slow ballad, and you have to kind of address that as you go in the room at the same time, which is certainly one thing in the world of virtual meetings and Zoom that I've
Yeah.
really found helpful. And just having those resets, like, I have my own routine if I'm presenting or I'm doing something where I just reset myself before I go into the next
Tell us
conversation.
what does your reset routine look like
It's just
between meetings?
Yeah, I thought you were about to say between me and you, and I was like, well, there's a lot more people on here than that. So, but it's a lot of it's just about kind of resetting posture and things like that. So just kind of elevating myself. You know, again, just kind of taking a minute to think about what I'm going in for, and then thinking about what you need to achieve in that meeting at the same time, because we deal with a lot of incidents, we deal with a lot of clients, and you have to go in with that true understanding of what their issues are,
Yeah.
rather than kind of going, what's this matter about? Where am I? What am I doing?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one of the big things. It's just kind of, resetting yourself. I tend to, if I'm on a Zoom call at the start, usually kind of have my arms on the desk to kind of elevate myself as well, making sure the camera's in the right place, and then just going into that discussion,
Yeah.
and then also coming out of it and having a minute to think about it, a minute to reset, as you would do in a, when you're doing music, especially when you're rehearsing and stuff like
Yeah.
that. You get to an end of a song and go, right, let me just go back. Where did I mess up? Here, I sang that wrong and I did this wrong. So it's quite good for like immediate self-reflection at the same time.
Yeah. And what I love about what you're saying about your reset routine rituals, if you like, is that you're very focused on the needs of your audience, Cameron, and which is absolutely key to good presenting.
Yeah,
Is that realization. I think when we can all get away from this feeling that it's about me and it's about me and it's about what do I look like and am I doing it right,
yeah,
and get it into the sense of service almost of what I've just kicked my computer lead. what what does this person need? What does this client need? And that brain switch is so important because you're used to being on a stage and you're
hmm
used to being in public. Do you ever see any things when people are presenting that you think, "Oh, don't do that," or anything, or things that annoy you?
I would personally ban swivel chairs in office meeting rooms, because it drives me mad when you've got someone sat like this, and I'm like, we're not in the IT rooms in secondary school anymore, where it's the first time on a spinny chair. It's
Yeah,
certainly one where you have that distraction elsewhere. I think it's a shame a lot of the time. I think people fall down on tech as well. They suddenly have a microphone and they don't know what to do with it. It's probably a different. I've seen best men speeches where they're
Mhm.
gesticulating and they've got the microphone and they're still talking and the microphone's over here, so you
Yes.
aren't actually getting the purpose of the microphone. Or people presenting and then they've
Mm.
got the microphone here and then they point it to the slides and continue talking, and it's like the slides aren't talking for you, you are talking, so the
Yes.
microphone needs to be here.
Yes. Yes.
And I think a lot of the time it's because you're being thrown into that environment. I've turned up to conferences before and they say, right, you need a lapel mic on, you need a headset on, you need to make sure it's going up your shirt, round the back of your shirt, over your ear, and then suddenly you're sat on a conference panel like this because it's pulling you backwards.
Yes.
But I think a lot of the time it's unfortunate where the tech, tech
Yes.
can let you down. But again, it's from that experience I've had before. I've done gigs where you turned up thinking you've got microphones and you haven't. You've got a group of 12 of you and they give you two microphones. So then you're trying to work out what sound groups do we need to amplify.
Yes.
That's certainly one. I think, there's a concern about over reliance on slides as well that I think is always a challenge for anyone. And a lot of it comes back to, I think, even when I'm mentoring juniors, is to say, look, this subject matter, you do this every day, this more than the audience you're speaking to. They're not here to trip you
Yes.
up, they're not here
Yeah.
to be smart. You can deliver this, so have trust in yourself that you are
Yeah.
able to prompt and speak about it, rather than reading off the slides or forever turning back. And that's
Oh,
the trust in your own knowledge and subject matter.
that's very much a concern of mine, is people talking not to the audience but talking to their own slides
Yeah,
like that. And so they turn their back on the audience and cut the audience out completely. And actually, because as you say, Cameron, they know the material really brilliantly,
mm,
that they can do it with a gesture, that they don't have to look back at them because they know
yeah,
what the slide says.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they can keep interacting. But I agree with you. I think slides, there is, if you're in a field where there's an awful lot of data that you need to share on a
yeah,
slide, well then there's arguments that say keep it to only a slide that has to have absolute essential information on. Or you might think to yourself, well, there's another way of sharing that, because if you put a lot of heavy data on a slide, who's got time to read it? Yes, I could wax lyrical about the problems with slide decks, but I
yeah,
think the point you're picking up on is that you can do the delivery, and
yeah,
that people, I think, don't realize what a wonderful potential they have to make the message come over so much more strongly than a slide
yeah,
deck, in how they say it. And they can be so, with our faces and what we do, in how
yeah,
we present, we've got the opportunity to lighten up the room.
yeah,
you know so if you were going back again, and
yeah,
I know you mentor a lot, don't you? You
yes,
work
yeah.
with a lot of young people. Is there anything in particular that you say to them to remember about presenting?
I think it's a mix. Like, I am still guilty now of having a lot of knowledge in my head and going at 50 miles an hour ahead of everything else. And I remember doing this presentation when I was a trainee, and the team that I worked with were like, "You're fantastic. You work really well on the business development side. You're always thinking about new ideas, and there's obviously a lot of stuff." And that's how I ended up in cyber. It was a very new concept when I was training, and I was like, right, this is something I'm passionate about. I can speak about. But I remember that we did this seminar, or this series of seminars, and they said, "Can you help the US partner prepare their slides? They're coming over, they're going to do the presentation," and then suddenly they said, "Oh well, they can't come now. Given you've done the research, why didn't you do it? Why didn't you do the presentation?" And I remember a couple of my supervisors kind of taking me into a room and saying, right, we're going to cut this bit because you're a bit exposed on this because you don't know the subject matter, and we're not going to do this, and we're just trying to protect you. But then I got into such a fluster that when I stood up and presented, I did this presentation, this 40-minute presentation, I think in about 19 or 20 minutes, with the head of my team at the back of the auditorium with this sign that he'd written saying, slow down, slow down, slow down. And actually what it did was, because I rushed through everything, it then made me more exposed, because there was no way they were starting that break early at the same time because of the rigid programming. So what I'd done is I'd gone through the content that I knew, or the content that I was most comfortable with, so quickly. I left myself exposed for 20 minutes on question and answers from a lot of technical people in the room. And that was then that kind of piece where, if I'd have extended that kind of period of sharing my knowledge in a deliberate and slow manner, um, then it's a very different kind of scenario than exposing yourself to whatever question. Someone sticks their hand up, they could ask you whatever you wanted. So that was one of my big things that I would go back and do again.
Yeah.
And I think as well, like, there's always a challenge where I think there's always that binary between singing or, doing a professional career, and people say, well, I can't sing once I go to uni. And we used to have people dropping out of All the King's Men 1 year in because they say, oh, I need to go and focus on my studies now. And I really wanted to. A friend of mine that I used to sing with, he's just actually left Big Four, but he was very high up in the Big Four accounting firms. Um, he was in the not the Festival of Remembrance, the Last Night of the Proms, like very visibly in one of the choirs on Last Night of the Proms. And this gentleman also has such a successful career. He's a very senior person at quite a large company now. And I'm like, oh, but there he is still singing at the same time and doing
Yeah.
that. Like, I think it's part of the well-being side of actually having something that you can
Yes.
step
Yeah.
away from your job and do. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people think of it as binary, saying, I can't do both because they don't complement each other. When I think they really do complement each other. You have lawyers who are fantastic sports people. You have lawyers who are, they have other things that they do. And I think it makes them more interesting human beings, but also better, it enhances their job, rather than saying, I'm going to be a lawyer now. I must stop singing. I must stop having fun. I must stop doing all of this. But actually, really helps you think on your feet. It really,
Mm.
I've got some great stories that I can still tell. I still refuse to do karaoke with my colleagues, but you really get a kind of a more rounded understanding of how to deal with situations and things like that.
Thank you. I really appreciate you joining me this morning, and thank you very much for sharing all of your experience.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for having me.